And so now we're going to talk about, generally speaking, the classical Greeks. There are four schools of thought in the classical Greeks, and you have read them. The first is generally the Platonistic position. The second is usually the Neo-Aristotelian, which literally translates to New Aristotle, meaning Aristotle. Then the third is generally I Socrates, not Socrates, but I Socrates. And then finally, we're looking at the Sophists, which is a school of thought that starts really before we started keeping track of this idea of rhetoric and still exists today. So let's start actually with Plato. And most of the time people start with Plato because he was really looking for something that has never existed and still does not exist. In other words, he was looking for an ideal that to which we should attempt to attain, but not necessarily that which we can have. This ideal came in the form of a theory about truth, really. Plato believed that there was a universal, capital T, one knowable truth. That truth, however, could only be ascertained through a process called dialectic. Dialectic is the process, just like dialogue sounds, of going back and forth with an idea or between two extremes and looking at the tension between them in order to understand or find that big T truth. This, to Plato, was a form of science. It was reasoned science. And it was philosophy. Of course, philosophy was the way of finding the truth because it was the way of finding the good in life. Plato's theory of the ideals basically suggests that there was a world out there that he calls the noumenal world that we somehow, as humans, know about, that has the ideals of everything, the ideal forms of everything. Ideal beauty, ideal peace, an ideal art, but more in a more, like, let's say, solid sense or material sense, the ideal desk or the ideal chair or the ideal person. These ideals are things that we could not achieve on Earth. And on Earth, what we really do is bastardize them. In an attempt to achieve ideals, we fail and we only get close, or as close as humans can get, to the ideal form of anything. So everything is just practice in an attempt to get to this next ideal. Imagine if you firmly believed, as Plato did, that everything that we have in this world is shy of its ideal, that it can always be better, that by pushing to the next level, we get something that is closer to the ideal. Now imagine that people want you to talk about that, whatever that thing is. And Plato comes to the conclusion that in talking about something as if it could be an ideal form, or as if it's in some relationship with the ideal form, as in, my husband's good looking, but he's not as good looking as my ideal would be. Or this chair is comfortable, but it's not as comfortable as ideally a chair should be. Ideals are not attainable. So Plato believed that ideals should be attainable through the practice of dialectic and through philosophy and through living the life of the good. So when rhetoric came along and said, well, rhetoric can describe the ideal, it can describe the good, Plato was mortified. Because describing the ideal or something as if it could be the ideal, well, what that really did was take a step further away from the ideal or further away from the truth. And therefore, rhetoric was horrible. In the book, you read 4 reasons, sometimes 5, but I identify 4 reasons why rhetoric is bad according to Plato. Most of these are found in Phaedrus. Of course, the first is that rhetoric can, in fact, make anything good and bad at the same time. So the essence of a thing is irrelevant. In other words, the truth is irrelevant because rhetoric can make it good. Oh, you don't like that chair? Well, let me explain to you all the ways that that chair is perfect or close to perfect and close to the ideal to make you believe that it's as good as it can be. A second reason why Plato didn't like rhetoric was because he felt that essentially it could be used for bad things. It was a tool that could be used by unethical people. And that would be bad. Another reason why he didn't like rhetoric was because aside from just simply hiding the truth, it could actually mutate the truth. So I could make you believe that something is what it is not, no matter what I'm making you believe it to be. For example, the picture behind me, I happen to think is a very good sketch. It's of a city. And if that's all that I told you about it and you evaluated this sketch as a city, you may or may not think that it is a good sketch because you can't really see it very clearly. If I pulled it closer to you, you would be able to tell what city it is. And actually, now that I look in my background, there's actually two pictures of two cities. They're both sketches. They're both done in pencil. And I could pull those closer and you could examine them for yourself and find the quote truth. Or I could simply describe them to you. And I can tell you that the one directly behind me is New York City. And that the one to the right of me, that way, I think it's my right and your left, is the city of Pittsburgh. And you would believe me. I could explain to you how that's the case. And unless you could get closer to it and analyze it, you wouldn't know that they were both, in fact, different cities. But the one directly behind me is actually Pittsburgh, and the one over there is actually St. Louis. And see, now you're looking at the pictures going, oh, okay, yes, I totally see that now. Except one problem. They're both Pittsburgh. And so the city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania is represented in both of those pictures. But as I describe them to you, even if you're not blind, even if you're able to see the pictures, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to know the quote truth of the pictures because I am able to change them with rhetoric. And thus we get at the heart of really what Plato's problem with rhetoric was. And he believed it was horrible for democracy. Of course, he also thought democracy was bad. He wanted a philosopher king because we all know that when Plato spoke, it was philosophy and therefore the truth. But whenever anybody else spoke, it was merely rhetoric and only hiding the truth. And so in Phaedrus, we get a story of seduction and of love. But we get a story that demonstrates how rhetoric can be used for both good and evil, how it can convince us of things that are not true or true, and how we never live in a world of any certainty, that is to say knowledge, if we live in a world with rhetoric. Of course, we're going to disagree with Plato. When I say we, I mean me. I'm going to disagree with Plato most of the time because my favorite guy who comes up next, Aristotle, who was in fact Plato's student, disagrees with Plato as well.